One question was, how personal should you get in your personal statement? And it's always hard to answer how much should you do X or Y because you can't quantify that. I can't say 70% personal or 50% personal, but I will say you probably want to get more personal than you feel comfortable doing, but you also don't want to make them recoil in shock from oversharing. So there's a fine line between keeping it bland and vague in general versus TMI. It's a fine line. You know it when you see it. And that's one of those things I'll be looking to call out in these personal statement drafts. Where are people getting too personal and where are people getting not personal enough? And typically I'll find people are not getting personal enough. And so that's something I want to look out for. I got a question about, should your personal statement cover the type of law you want to do? So criminal law, family law, tax law. Should you mention that specifically? And so I would say there's no need to mention that specifically, but it's nice to mention if you have a good reason to do so, if you have a compelling area of specialty that you've worked in previously or background in a particular area. That's nice to mention, but don't feel any obligation to do so. And some people go overboard in calling out a specific area when they don't really have the background to justify that. So call out and recognize that your area of specialty, your desired focus area may change over time. Last question I got was, should your personal statement be tailored to different law schools? So do you need to say, I want to go to Harvard versus Yale versus Stanford versus Chicago or any one number of other schools? And the answer is no. You don't need to mention specific law schools. And if you do, you run the risk of forgetting to swap out the name when you're going to different schools. So put it in big, bold letters in your draft where you're mentioning specific schools so that you can swap it out when you need to. Don't forget, please. So I'm going to call out 7 things I want you to be on the lookout for when you're writing your personal statement draft. And the first comes down to getting started. Action over perfection. It's way too easy to have a blank page or a blank screen with the cursor blinking and not knowing what to do. Obviously, it's hard to talk about yourself when most writing that you do isn't really about you. It's easy to get into that deer in headlights situation where you're just frozen and you're not able to get started. So I want to encourage you, put that aside, free write, just stream of consciousness, let it flow, do it fast, bad, and wrong. Just get started, put something down. You could delete it all afterwards, but take 20 minutes, 30 minutes, even just 5 minutes, and just start writing something about maybe why you want to go to law school or a statement, a story you want to share. Just get it out there. You can always edit and revise and iterate going forward, but it does not have to be perfect. The first draft won't be perfect. The third draft won't be perfect. And the 10th draft also won't be perfect. Writing is never done. It's never perfect. It's never finished. It's just simply good enough to a point where it's time to move on. So don't be afraid to put something out there. We can always review drafts in sessions like this and make edits for going forward, but you got to at least have something to work with rather than simply having a blank screen or a blank page. Secondly is personal versus professional. I think a lot of folks there's a missed opportunity when it comes to your personal statements where you don't take advantage of that chance to share something personal about yourself. Rather, people just laundry list their resumes rather than sharing something deep about themselves that only they could share. So your resume is your resume. Leave that there. Use the personal statement to go deeper. Share something personal about yourself, that's something that they couldn't get elsewhere. And using the first person like I, me, my, mine, all of that is totally fine. This is a personal statement. Don't feel the need to be overly professional or overly objective. This is you that we're talking about is a personal statement, not a professional statement of purpose. So you can get personal and you should. Another distinction is one thing versus everything. And I've discussed this with a few of you already. One thing and go deep, not trying to cover everything on the surface level. You've got about 2 pages double spaced. You can't summarize your entire life in those 2 pages, so don't try to. If you've got 10 different things you want to share, that's great. You're not going to have space to share all 10, unfortunately. You can summarize them in your resume, but your personal statement should cover one of those in depth. Then maybe you can cover another one in a diversity statement, another one in an optional essay. Maybe other stories will come through in your letters of rec, but you can't cover everything in the personal statement. And if you try to cover it all, you're going to end up not saying very much at all, and it won't be as compelling in the end. Another distinction is self versus others. Talk about yourself. It should be focused on you. A lot of people submitted drafts to me that covered other people, how they admire somebody else, how they had an experience of somebody else. It could be a family member. It could be somebody you encountered once in your life, but they really made an impression on you. And that's great. Role models are important. Stories are important, but bring it back to yourself. Only use the other person as a jumping off point. Bring it back to you and the insights and takeaways you got from that interaction or that experience of somebody else. So it should be maybe 5% them or 10% them, the rest all about you, bringing it back to you. Another distinction is extraordinary versus the everyday. A lot of people are afraid to offend. They're afraid to get personal. They end up being boring. Don't be vanilla about this. Think rainbows and unicorns. You want to be unique. You want to show what a special, unique individual you are. You want to stand out. And that runs the risk of being polarizing sometimes. So it is a fine line. But again, I find two people err on the side of being bland over being outstanding. So you want to go from the perspective of most people think X about me, but actually Y. So for example, if I were to write one, I might talk about how most people think that when you're a minor internet celebrity focused on the LSAT, you've got tons of adulation all the time. You're feeling great all the time. You've got thousands of followers and you're basking in all of that. Maybe you think that, I don't know. But I would have thought that having 5,000 followers or whatever would make a big difference. It turns out that the more successful you become, the more lonely you get sometimes, because it's just numbers on a screen. It's not real interactions. And so I could write a statement simply about that, what most people don't know about me. I could go in that direction. I could talk about being suspended from college for a few years. I could talk about how most people would think an LSAT instructor is totally logical, but in reality, I've gotten into a lot of woo-woo stuff that most people would think is crazy. That's the stuff underneath the surface. It's personal and you wouldn't expect it. So it stands out for that reason. And if you want to go more in that direction, I have these forums I've been running every couple of weeks or so where we share stuff like this that's underneath the surface. And if you talk about that, in a setting like that, it could actually help you bring out your personal statement topic when you wouldn't have thought to talk about that otherwise, or even felt safe talking about that otherwise. And so I would encourage you, come to the forum sessions. I'm running one at the end of this month, and that could be a good place for you to unpack more of the personal and get deeper underneath the surface. Another distinction is past versus future. A lot of people talk about what they will do, tying it back to why law school in particular, when in reality, that's all theoretical. It hasn't happened yet. And so all the promises you can make about your future career success don't mean a whole lot if you don't have the experience to back it up. And of course, your goals may change over time in law school. So I would suggest that you don't focus on the future. You don't focus on why law school. You can mention it, but what's going to be a lot more real to them is what you've done up to this point. And again, not laundry listing the resume. You'll have space for that, but instead talk about one particular thing you've done, one experience you've had, and that will serve as your evidence, as your reason why law school and why perhaps a particular career goal. And finally, anti-fragile versus fragile. Anti-fragility versus fragility. Don't excuse things that have happened to you, simply explain. This should not be a pity party. Don't try to justify everything. It comes off as weak. It comes off as complaints. Turn your weaknesses and failures into strengths. Show what you've learned from the experiences and end on a positive note. It's okay that bad things happen to you if they did, and you can mention that, but show the post-traumatic growth that comes out of that experience. Don't leave it on a sour note or blaming others, because that just leaves a bad taste in people's mouths, and you want them to walk away feeling good about you. You want them to walk away liking you. Personal biases are unavoidable. These are human beings reading your application. They have their own prior life experiences to draw upon, and certain topics will speak to them more than others. And different people will tell you different things about the same draft. I've had lots of discussions with current and former admission officers, and some of them give completely contradictory advice. One person will say, not everybody should write a diversity statement. Others will say, anybody can. So there's not always a clear, right, definitive answer on this. It is a human process. It's not totally objective, not totally scientific. That being said, I've reviewed hundreds of personal statements. I've reviewed tons of applications for different things, and certain things do stand out in a positive way. Other things stand out in a negative way, But this is just my take as I'm walking through these, and I'll invite you to share feedback as well. You may connect with some things more than others. I might connect with some things more than others. So as we walk through these, think about how you might critique these statements and how you might write a statement like this if this was your story. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.